Hi, welcome to this Melbourne IVF webinar that's on this evening. I'm Melissa Cameron, I'm one of the fertility specialists at Melbourne IVF, and this is my colleague Marianne Tome, who's our counselling manager at Melbourne IVF.
Hi.
I'm going to start the presentation now. So this webinar this afternoon, this evening, is about becoming a sperm donor. And tonight we've got myself and Marianne speaking, I've introduced before. So tonight we're really going to be talking about why we need sperm donors, who can become a sperm donor, and the process for becoming a sperm donor. We really hope to guide you through all of these topics that might arise when you're considering becoming a sperm donor, because it is an incredible gift that you're giving people, but we do understand that it can be a very difficult decision to make. There's a number of considerations that need to be taken into account when you're going through that process. So as well as going through these other things, we'll also look at some of the Victorian legislation regarding sperm donors to make sure you're aware of and understand the legislation that's involved. But just a bit of housekeeping first of all. If you have any questions, we're very open to the idea of questions, and we'll be answering these at the end of the webinar. So if you want to ask any questions, if you're watching on Google Hangout, you can use the Q&A app, which is on your screen. Or if you're watching on YouTube, please feel free to comment in the section below the video. But why do we need sperm donors? Infertility is a really common problem throughout Australia. It affects an estimated about 1 in 6 couples who are trying to conceive. And although for many people they won't necessarily need IVF or need donation of sperm, for some couples this is, and in some other situations, this is the only way that they'll be able to achieve a family. So donor sperm can be required by heterosexual couples who are experiencing severe male infertility, such as not enough sperm or in fact even no sperm. There may be some genetic conditions that can be transferred through the male line that they wish to try and avoid. We also see an increasing number of same-sex couples wanting to create a family, and also single women wanting to also start a family. And in this situation, they also do need some donor sperm. And in Victoria at the moment, we're currently experiencing a donor sperm shortage. So we're hoping that webinars such as this will encourage more of you to become sperm donors. So who can become a sperm donor through Melbourne IVF? Well, we require that you're aged between 25 and 45 years. We also require that you're an Australian citizen or a permanent resident. Other factors that we want you to consider is certainly if you have any children, they must be over the age of 12 months before you start the process. And if you have a partner, they also do need to be part of the process and be involved while you make these types of decisions. With regards our considerations, we do have some flexibility, particularly for those people who are what we call recipient recruited. So these are people who are known to the recipients. They may be friends or family of people requiring donor sperm. We do have a little bit more flexibility, and certainly each situation is taken into account and taken as an individual. You have various medical reviews and so on. The other thing to consider is that donating sperm is purely an altruistic act, and it's illegal in Australia to be paid to be a sperm donor. However, we certainly do reimburse you for the time to cover things like time away from work, travel, parking and so on. So just touching again on what a clinic recruited versus a recipient recruited sperm donor is. A clinic recruited sperm donor is one where the information is de-identified. So you donate sperm, but you've never met any of your recipients. They complete the process without the recipients. They must fit the required criteria that I went through previously. And as a clinic recruited sperm donor, you're unable to direct who will receive your donation. So you can't tell us who you want your donation to go to. Your profile will be offered to those in need, whether they're a heterosexual couple, a same-sex couple, or a single woman. With regards recipient recruited sperm donors, in this situation, you know who the recipient is going to be, and you complete that process with the recipient. So there will in most situations be such as a counselling session together, and certainly we do assess your suitability on an individual basis. So I'll now pass over to my colleague Marianne, who will explore the donor process in more detail. Marianne.
Okay, thanks, Melissa. So hopefully you may still be interested in becoming a donor and are wondering, what do I need to do next? So let's begin with looking at the sperm donation process. The first step is to contact the Melbourne IVF donor program nurse or our community liaison administrators, and the number's up there on the screen. They'll make sure that you fit the criteria that we spoke about before in order to become a donor. If you meet that criteria, you will then go through a quick registration process and we'll book you in for your initial counselling appointment with a Melbourne IVF counsellor. In Victoria, it is a legislative requirement that donors and your partner, if you have a partner, meet with a counsellor to explore all the things you need to consider before deciding to be a sperm donor. So the counselling is an opportunity to consider the potential legal, psychosocial and practical implications associated with becoming a donor to ensure that you are making an informed decision. The implications that we look at vary depending on whether you are a clinic recruited or recipient recruited sperm donor. So, for example, for a clinic recruited sperm donor, we'll explore your reasons for being a donor, the number of families you wish to create as a result of your donation. Under Victorian legislation, no more than 10 women can have children to the same donor, and this includes your own family. So if you had children to a previous partner and a current partner, the most the number of women that you'd be able to donate to would be 8. We'd also look at what happens when there is a successful outcome as a result of your donation. So really getting you to think about the reality that your donation will, hopefully, will result in children being born who become teenagers, who become adults. We'll also look at how you'll feel if one of those donor-conceived children wish to make contact with you in the future, and we'll explore how that might happen. We also will look at telling your families and friends, telling new partners, telling any children that you may have or may have in the future. If you're a recipient recruited donor, some of the additional things you may need to consider is how the donation, whether the donation is successful or not, will impact on your relationship with the recipients, your expectations regarding your relationship with any child born as a result of your donation. And again, we'll look at what information should be shared between families and friends, especially when you share the same families and friends. It can be an important thing to look at. So then, following your initial counselling session, you'll come back and you'll complete a further session with the same counsellor to review any questions or concerns that you may have. And if you're happy to proceed and we're happy for you to proceed, you will then consent to being a donor. If you're a recipient recruited sperm donor, we may also require you to have a joint session with your recipients at this stage. And that's to make sure that you're all on the same page, have the same expectations, the same understanding of how that donation will proceed. You'll then need to undertake a screening blood test and semen analysis to assess your sperm quality. And these results will be discussed with you in a medical appointment completed with a Melbourne IVF fertility specialist. This appointment will also involve a review of your medical history, physical examination, and will assess your suitability to become a sperm donor. All donors are also required to complete a genetic and medical health questionnaire, and any issues that arise from this form will be discussed with you at your medical appointment. So following your medical appointment, you'll be required to schedule a series of andrology appointments, and this is where you provide your sperm donation. The number of times you need to come in to provide those samples may vary, but recipient recruited donors can expect to donate about 2 to 4 times, and clinic recruited sperm donors, given that you'll be donating to more women, may be required to do approximately 8 to 12 donations. These donations are then quarantined for a 3-month period to screen for any infectious diseases, and once the quarantine period is completed, you're required to come in for one last blood test to ensure you're clear of any infectious diseases. And then once you've been cleared, we'll then start offering your profile to potential recipients. As part of this process, you'll be required to provide what we call non-identifying information, and this will be used to create your donor profile. And the donor profile is what we will show recipients, and that will help them in selecting a suitable donor. The provision of this information is a legal requirement, and that we provide that information to births, deaths and marriages. If you're a clinic recruited sperm donor, as I said, that will then also be offered to the recipients. As you can see from the slide here, some of the information that is included as part of your profile includes the year of birth, physical characteristics, sexual orientation, your education and occupation, your interests, and your reason for donating. Donors are also requested to provide information about your expectations, openness to contact from recipients and donor-conceived children. We also ask you to write a message for any child conceived from your donation. This is included as part of your profile, and many recipients find this message really helpful for selecting a suitable donor. Okay, so as a donor within Victoria, you have a number of rights under Victorian legislation. As a donor, you are not legally viewed as the father of any child born, and therefore you have no parental rights or responsibilities, for example, financial obligation. As a donor, you are able to ask and you can receive, if you ask, non-identifying information about children born as a result of your donation, and you can request identifying information with the recipient or donor conceived person's consent. So you will only be given, as a donor, you will only be given identifying information if the recipient, if the child's under 18 or if the child is over 18 with their consent. So obviously the donor conceived child also has rights under Victorian legislation, and one of these is that once that donor conceived child reaches mature age, they have the right to obtain identifying information about their donor, and this information can be obtained through births, deaths and marriages. A parent of a donor conceived child may also seek both identifying and non-identifying information about the donor, but this will only be provided with your consent. So the only time that identifying information about you will be provided is when the child is the donor conceived child either reaches 18 years of age or is considered to be sufficiently mature, so maybe 16 or 17, and they request that information. So in being a donor, you need to consider that you probably will be contacted by donor conceived children at some stage in the future, and you may also be contacted by recipients, or at least requested that that contact be made by recipients prior to the child turning 18. And I guess the reason why this happens is because research and practice wisdom, etc., generally accepts that it is in the best interest of the child for their parents to be open with their child about how they were conceived, that they were donor conceived, and therefore because parents are being more open with their children and telling them about that, children are curious, they're wanting to know about their donors, and so it's more likely that they will be contacted, that you will be contacted by recipients or donor offspring. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, a sort of a brief overview of what it means to be a donor, to be a clinic recruited sperm donor and a recipient recruited sperm donor with Melbourne IVF. We'd now like to address any questions you may have. Once again, please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A app on Google Hangout or via the comment section on YouTube if you're on YouTube.
So we do have a couple of questions so far. The first one is, how much time would I typically have to dedicate to becoming a donor? And really it involves essentially the 2 counselling sessions, so 2 visits for the counselling sessions, a visit for having your blood test taken, which often can happen at the same time or the same sort of appointment as having your counselling sessions. You then have a medical appointment, and then after that, if you're a recipient recruited donor, you're mostly going to have somewhere between 2 and 4 visits to the andrology lab to deposit your sperm. If you're a clinic recruited donor, you'll be having a few more visits, so somewhere between 8 to 12 visits we anticipate most men will need to make in order to deposit an offspring so that we can distribute it to the recipients. The second question that we have is that I'm quite healthy, a non-smoker, a non-drinker, but I'm overweight. Can I still become a donor? I might take this one.
That's a good one for you to take.
So certainly, we assess everyone individually. As long as you meet our basic criteria, you will have a medical appointment. At which stage you'll have a thorough assessment from a medical point of view to make sure you are healthy. We wouldn't knock you back at being a sperm donor purely on the basis of your weight alone. And our third question is that I donated overseas. Does that donation get included in the number of women who can use my sperm, or is the 10 women limit a Victorian law only?
Do you want me to do that? Yeah, that one. Yeah. So the 10 women limit in Victoria is worldwide. So if you have donated elsewhere in Australia or overseas, we will need to include that in your count. And if you've donated to more than 10 women overseas, we won't be able to use your donation. Well, there's another question about what if you donated but then enter into a relationship and decide that you no longer want to no longer want to donate, no longer want to be a donor. Is it possible to withdraw your donation? Yes, under Victorian legislation, you are able to withdraw your consent to use of the sperm or any embryos created with your sperm at any time. Now, obviously, that would have huge implications for people who may already have children or may have embryos in storage. So at the counselling process at the start of being a donor, we will talk to you quite a bit about that and talk about how you might feel or think about your donation at various stages in your life. For example, if you do meet someone and you need to tell them that you've been a donor, if you have children of your own, and that can sometimes be a time where donors think differently or revisit having been a donor and what that means for them. So we do explore that quite carefully, because you can withdraw consent, but the implications can be significant for recipients.
And the other question that's come through is, how strict is the age limit to become a donor? I am 47 and very fit and healthy.
Okay.
So for our clinic recruited donors, we are quite strict with our age cut-off at the age of 45. If you're a recipient recruited donor, then it's certainly something that is more open to individual assessment to assess more areas from a health point of view. And part of that's based on the fact that we do know that as men age, sperm quality declines, and there are concerns about health of children to children born from men of older ages.
Mm-hmm. And there's another question, which is, can I find out about the number of children that are born as a result of my donation? And yes, you can. So we at Melbourne IVF can provide you with non-identifying information, so we can tell you the number of families that have been created as a result of your donation, the number of children in each of those families, the sex of those children, and what year they were born in. So we can do that. If you wanted further information, we can also see the non-identifying information of the recipients. If you want identifying information, then you need to go through births, deaths and marriages and make an application for identifying information, or to see if there's any information on what's called the voluntary register. And the voluntary register is where recipients, donor-conceived children and donors can voluntarily leave information about themselves. But if you want identifying information, you can make an application. Births, deaths and marriages would then contact the recipients if the child's under 18, or the child themselves if they're over 18, and let them know that there's someone interested that the donor's interested in finding out identifying information about them, and then they would need to get permission for that. But yeah, we get donors asking, sort of regularly about, can you let me know how many children are being created, and we're happy to give you that information.
Do you have any more questions coming through this stage?
So, okay, there's another question, which is just, can we go over again the process for what you need to do next? So the number that you need to ring if you are interested in being a donor or you want more information is 1-800
111 483.
Yeah. And if you contact that number, they will then answer any questions that you have. If you want to make a counselling appointment, they can book in a counselling appointment for you. Please don't feel that, if you start the process with counselling, that's it. You have to go through the process. If you want to come in and just explore it a bit further, ask questions, find out more about the program and what it means to be a donor, we're happy to do that for you.
And I think one of the things I'd just like to reiterate is I do see a lot of patients who are recipients of donor sperm. I held 2 little babies today who were conceived as a result of clinic recruited donor sperm, and the parents are so grateful and so incredibly grateful, and it really is a really wonderful gift that you can give someone. So please consider it.
Got another question, is do you state to potential couples or person's sexual orientation? So on your, what we call your non-identifying information, which is your profile that the recipients will see, it will have your sexual orientation, and so that they will choose that, and that'll be part of their selection. But we have a wide range of people that use our use our donors, and that's why it's really important that we have a wide range of donors too.
Just checking to see if any other questions are coming through. We've got another one coming through.
It does feel like a telephone.
Telephone. Or eagerly waiting.
What's the question's going to be?
So the question is, how many children can be conceived from the initial 2 to 4 donations? Part of it depends on the quality of your sperm and how we actually end up using your sperm in treatments. The sperm is either used for insemination, so the sperm is put directly inside the uterus, or it's used for IVF. And when we do IVF treatment with donor sperm, we use a process called ICSI, or intracytoplasmic sperm injection. Practicing that one, which is where we directly inject a single sperm into the egg. So from one sample, you may expect, say, 20 million sperm. So of those, a good percentage of them will be usable sperm. So certainly you can conceive a number of children through the 2 to 4 donations. So it won't necessarily mean 2 to 4 tries. And there's no upper limit as to how many children a couple or an individual can have from one sperm donor. But there is that limit as to how many women can be allocated you as the sperm donor.
And the 2 to 4 donations that's generally for recipient recruited if you're donating to one woman or to a couple. So that would be enough for them to probably have a couple of children at each. Maybe.
And part of when we're counselling it, potential patients with a recipient recruited donor is how many children do you anticipate having? How many children is your ideal family number? If they say 5 or 6, which I haven't had anyone do, but if they do want a large family, then we'll ask the donor to leave more donations.
Yep. Yeah.
So we do individualise that one.
Yeah, and with our clinic recruited sperm donors, you do need to consider that with that donation that you make, which can be 8 to 12 times you need to come in and donate. If you were donating to eight women and each of those women had 2 children, that is 16 children that would be born as a result of your donation.
And so we've had another question come through. Can female same-sex couples access the same donor for treatment using a clinic recruited donor?
Yeah, we think it's really important that, same-sex couples think it's really important for the child to be able to have a genetic link. So they do like to, in most cases, use the same donor. So we do allow that. One partner will come through first, and then we will hold an allocation for that donor for when their partner is ready to come through too, so that they can use the same donor.
And the one thing I would say is that those women are considered 2 women as opposed to 2 allocations as opposed to 1 allocation. So potentially you're not going to have 20 women that are in same-sex couples.
No, so we have to, under the current legislation, we can't count families. We have to count women. So if you have 2 women in the one family, we have to count them as 2 women. So you may, in fact, if your donation is used for a couple of same-sex couples, the number of families that you may have may only be 4, even though it might be 7 or 8 women. That may actually only be 4 or 5 families.
Got another question about recipient recruited sperm donors. Is there any other information you can give us about donors that are known to the recipient? From my perspective as a doctor, I do have a lot of patients who choose to have a recipient recruited donor. It's a very individual decision for each situation, each couple, each family. There's a great variety of arrangements that they have in place in those situations, from strictly donations, sperm donor relations, to wanting to have some active contact with the children, to wanting to be a co-parent. Is that your experience as well, Marianne?
Yeah. Now, under the Victorian legislation, as a donor, you can't be on the birth certificate, and you have no rights as a parent as a donor. And that's the way that we need to go through the process. You'll be recorded at births and under births, deaths, and marriages on the donor register as the donor. But what you do outside of that, what you agree between you in terms of contact you have with the child, the relationship you have with the child, responsibilities you have regarding the child, is up to the 2 of you. If you are looking at entering into an arrangement that goes beyond just being donor and recipient, then we would strongly advise you to get legal advice so that you understand the implications of having a relationship that goes beyond just being donor and recipient.
And I would say there are a lot of resources out there, particularly in Victoria. We're very blessed to have a very active Rainbow Families Council. There is a Rainbow Families Council website, which is an awesome resource, considering it's a voluntary run organisation. And there is, if you access their website, there is a section specifically for sperm donors and the sort of things to think about if you're considering entering into a sperm donor relationship, either as a clinic donor or as a recipient recruited donor as well.
And that could be, using a recipient recruited sperm donor can be, a really rich experience for a child to be able to have access to information, to have that contact, to have some sort of relationship. It's easier for them to, if they've got questions, if they're wondering about, putting the pieces of the jigsaw together, where do their genetics come from? It's easier for that to happen. But through clinical recruited sperm donor program too, there still is that access to that information.
I think every situation is so individual. I think it's important you don't feel pressured into a situation like that, and really consider all of the good side, and of which there are many, 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 but also the potential difficulties and hard sides of entering such an agreement as well.
So last questions. Do parents ever want to involve donors from the onset of pregnancy? Is this something that is encouraged or not? So if, as we were just saying, if you're a recipient recruited sperm donor, yes, that happens, that there is agreement that you'll be involved and have a role to some degree in the child's life right from the start. Clinic recruited, not so. That doesn't really happen. It would be more likely that as the child gets older and starts asking questions about their donor, that the recipient parent might decide that it's a good time to make contact with the donor and find, in order to be able to answer some of those questions. Some legislation that's changing mid-year, and that will allow more flexibility for contact between donors and recipients. So what we're hoping is that there will be forums where you can, and ways that you can actually have contact, ask questions, provide information without being identified if you're not ready to be identified at that stage. Okay, so thank you everybody for participating today. Thank you for your great questions. That brings us to the conclusion of this evening's webinar. We hope we've been able to answer the questions that you may have had and to provide you with the necessary information. If you have any further questions about the webinar, please contact the Melbourne IVF Community Liaison Administrators, Morgan and Michelle, and then they can answer your questions and help you with the next steps of the process.
Thank you very much.